Dad died on a Tuesday morning in March. The doctor said his heart just stopped while he was reading the newspaper. One minute he was laughing at the comics section, the next minute he was gone. I found him in his favorite chair, still wearing his reading glasses, the paper folded neatly in his lap. Julian arrived at the hospital 20 minutes after I called him. He didn't cry. He didn't even touch Dad's hand. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started making calls. "I need to speak with the estate lawyer," he said to someone on the other end. Yes, today would be preferable. I was still in shock, still trying to process that Dad would never call me kiddo again, never teach me another life lesson over morning coffee. But Julian was already planning, already moving pieces on a chessboard I didn't even know we were playing. The funeral director handed us a packet of paperwork. Julian snatched it before I could even read the cover. "I'll handle all the arrangements," he said, his voice businesslike and cold. "You just focus on grieving." I should have known right then that something was wrong. The funeral was everything Dad would have hated. Julian hired expensive flowers, an overpriced casket, and a catered reception that cost more than Dad's monthly pension. People kept whispering about how generous Julian was being with the arrangements. I tried to speak with Julian about the will during the reception. Dad had mentioned updating it last year after his birthday. But every time I brought it up, Julian would find an excuse to walk away. "We'll deal with business matters later," he kept saying. "Today is about celebrating Dad's life." Mrs. Peterson from next door pulled me aside near the coffee table. "Your father was so proud of you, Caleb. He always said you had the biggest heart of his two boys." Her words made my chest tight with grief. Julian overheard and joined our conversation. "Dad always worried about Caleb, though," he said with a fake smile. Said he was too trusting for his own good. Mrs. Peterson looked uncomfortable and excused herself. I watched Julian work the room like a politician, shaking hands and accepting condolences. But something in his eyes felt different, calculating, like he was already counting something that didn't belong to him yet. Just before you continue to watch, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. Back to the story. 3 days after the funeral, I got a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was professional but confused. "Mr. Patterson, this is James Mitchell from Mitchell & Associates. I'm calling about the estate paperwork you signed yesterday." My blood went cold. I didn't sign any paperwork yesterday. There was a long pause. "According to our records, you came in with your brother Julian and signed the beneficiary transfer documents. You seemed eager to get everything processed quickly." I sat down hard on my kitchen chair. "Mr. Mitchell, I was at work yesterday. I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. You can check with my principal if you need verification." Another pause. "I think we need to schedule a meeting immediately." Julian had forged my signature. My own brother had walked into that law office and pretended to be me, signing away my rights to Dad's estate. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. I called Julian immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. His recorded message sounded cheerful and normal, like he hadn't just committed fraud using my identity. I drove to Dad's house that evening, using the spare key he'd given me years ago. Julian's truck was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in Dad's study. The front door was unlocked, which surprised me. Dad always locked his doors. Inside, I found Julian sitting behind Dad's desk, surrounded by papers and file folders. He looked up when I walked in, and for just a second, I saw panic flash across his face. Then he smiled that fake smile again. "Caleb, I was just organizing Dad's affairs. You know how he was with paperwork. Everything's scattered everywhere." I sat down in the chair across from him, the same chair where Dad used to help me with homework. "The lawyer called me today, Julian." His smile faltered slightly. "Oh, what did he want?" "He wanted to thank me for coming in yesterday to sign the estate documents. Funny thing is, I was teaching fractions to 8-year-olds yesterday." Julian's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "There must be some mistake. Maybe he got confused about the dates." I stared at my brother, searching for any trace of the person I thought I knew. "Show me the will, Julian." Julian shuffled through the papers on Dad's desk, making a show of looking frustrated. "That's the problem, Caleb. I can't find Dad's recent will anywhere. I've looked through everything." "What do you mean you can't find it?" "The will from 2019 is the only one I can locate. The lawyer says we have to go with the most recent documented version." He held up a folder. This one leaves everything to me since it was written before you turn 18. I knew Dad had updated his will last year. He'd mentioned it during one of our Sunday dinners, saying he wanted to make sure both his sons were taken care of equally. Julian was at that dinner too. That specifically told us both that he was updating the will to split everything 50-50. Julian shrugged. Memory can be funny when you're grieving, little brother. Maybe you misunderstood what he was saying. The casual way he dismissed my memory made my anger flare. This wasn't grief talking. This was calculation. Julian had planned this. I stood up to leave, but stopped at the doorway. I'm going to keep looking for that will. His voice followed me out. Good luck with that. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Dad's last words to me in the hospital, just before the surgery that was supposed to fix his heart. Take care of the family legacy, kiddo, he'd whispered. Don't let anyone destroy what we've built. At the time, I thought he meant the landscaping business he'd started 30 years ago. But now I wondered if he'd known something about Julian that I'd been too naive to see. The next morning, I drove back to Dad's house. Julian wasn't there, but his truck had left deep tire marks in the driveway. I used my key to get inside and started searching every room systematically. Dad was meticulous about important documents. He had files for everything: taxes, insurance, warranties for appliances we'd thrown away years ago. But I couldn't find any trace of the updated will Julian claimed was missing. In Dad's bedroom, I found something interesting. His 2023 calendar had a notation on October 15th. J. Mitchell, 2 p.m., final will revision. That was just 6 months ago. Julian had to know about this appointment. I took a photo of the calendar page with my phone. This was proof that Dad had updated his will recently. I was about to leave when I remembered the old filing cabinet in the garage. Dad always kept it locked with a heavy padlock, claiming it was just tax stuff and boring business records. Julian and I used to joke about what secrets Dad might be hiding in there. The garage smelled like motor oil and sawdust, just like it always had. Dad's tools hung neatly on pegboards, and his workbench was still covered with the project he was building before he died, a birdhouse for a Mrs. Peterson. The filing cabinet sat in the corner, looking exactly the same as it had for 20 years. Rusty green metal with a thick padlock that probably had been there since I was in elementary school. I pulled on it, not expecting anything to happen. To my surprise, the lock was hanging open. Julian must have cut it when he was going through Dad's things. The file drawer slid open with a metallic screech that echoed through the garage. Inside were manila folders stuffed with papers. Tax returns going back decades, business licenses, insurance policies. But at the very bottom, underneath everything, was a large envelope marked Caleb in Dad's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I sat on Dad's workbench and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on Dad's personal stationery, along with several other documents I couldn't identify yet. The letter was dated just 2 months ago, written in Dad's shaky handwriting that had gotten worse after his small stroke last year. Caleb, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Julian has tried to pull something. I've known for a long time that your brother has problems with honesty, especially when money is involved. He thinks I don't know about the credit cards he opened in my name, or the checks he forged from the business account last year. I've tried to give Julian chances to change, but a leopard doesn't change its spots. I want you to know that I trust you completely, and I've made sure you're protected. Don't let him convince you that you're not entitled to half of everything I've worked for. You've earned it through your kindness and integrity. Look for the blue binder. Everything you need is in there. Love, Dad. My eyes burned with tears. Dad had known Julian would try to cheat me. He'd prepared for this exact situation. I looked back in the envelope and found what Dad was referring to. A blue 3-ring binder labeled Final Will and Testament, 2023 revision. My hands shook as I opened the binder. The first page was a cover letter from James Mitchell's law firm, dated October 20th, 2023. It acknowledged receipt of Dad's updated will and confirmed that all documents had been properly notarized and filed. The will itself was 12 pages long and crystal clear. Everything was split 50-50 between Julian and me. The house, the landscaping business, Dad's retirement accounts, even his restored 1967 Impala that Julian had always coveted. But there was more. Attached to the will were bank statements for an account I'd never heard of. Dad had been secretly setting aside money for years in a separate savings account at a different bank. The balance made my eyes widen. $127,000. According to the documents, this account was designated solely for me, with a note from Dad. For Caleb's future, college, house, whatever makes him happy. Julian already had his chances. I photographed every page with my phone, making sure the images were clear and legible. This was my evidence. This was the truth Julian had tried to bury. I drove straight to Robert Chen's house. He lived in a small cottage near the lake where he and Dad used to fish every weekend. Robert answered the door, wearing an old Cardinals baseball cap and a sad smile. "Caleb, I was hoping you'd stop by. I've been thinking about your dad every day since the funeral." I explained why I was there and showed him photos of the will on my phone. Robert's face grew serious as he studied the documents. "Oh yes, I remember that day very clearly. Your dad called me that morning and asked if I could witness something important. We met at the lawyer's office around 2 o'clock. Do you remember what Dad said about the will?" Robert nodded emphatically. He said he wanted to make sure both his boys were treated fairly. He was worried that Julian had some growing up to do, but he didn't want to cut him out completely. I felt a surge of relief. This was independent verification that Dad's intentions were exactly what I thought they were. "There's something else," Robert continued. "Your dad asked me to give this to you if anything happened to him." He disappeared into his house and returned with a small wooden box. He said you'd understand what it meant. Inside the wooden box was Dad's old pocket watch, the one his grandfather had given him. But underneath the watch was something unexpected. A small key and a note that read, "Safety Deposit Box 447, First National Bank Downtown." Dad had a safety deposit box I didn't know about? I thanked Robert and drove straight to the bank. The manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, remembered Dad very well. "Mr. Patterson was very specific about this box," she said, as she led me to the vault. "He added your name as an authorized accessor just last month. He said if anything happened to him, you should check the box immediately." The safety deposit box contained more evidence of Julian's dishonesty than I could have imagined. There were photocopies of forged checks, credit card applications Julian had filled out using Dad's information, and even a recording device with a note attached. "Listen to this, Jay's confession about the business loans." I plugged in earphones and pressed play. Julian's voice came through clearly, talking to someone on the phone about how he'd been borrowing money from the business account to pay off gambling debts. He laughed about how Dad was too trusting to notice. The recording was dated just 3 weeks before Dad died. My father knew everything Julian was doing, and he'd been collecting evidence. I needed legal help, so I called James Mitchell and scheduled an emergency meeting. When I arrived at his office, he looked genuinely shocked to see the blue binder and the additional evidence from the safety deposit box. "This changes everything," he said, after reviewing the documents. "Your brother committed fraud when he forged your signature, and this will is clearly valid and properly executed." Mr. Mitchell explained that Julian had pressured him to execute the old will quickly, claiming there was no recent version and that I was too emotionally distraught to handle estate matters. Julian had seemed so credible and concerned about my well-being. "Can we stop him from taking Dad's assets?" I asked. "Absolutely. I'm filing an emergency motion today to freeze all estate assets pending investigation. Julian won't be able to sell, transfer, or access anything until this is resolved." As Mr. Mitchell prepared the paperwork, I felt a mixture of sadness and determination. I was sad that my relationship with Julian was destroyed forever, but determined to honor Dad's wishes and protect what he'd worked his whole life to build. "There's one more thing," Mr. Mitchell said. "We need to report the signature forgery to the authorities. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. It's a criminal matter." I called Julian that evening to tell him about the real will. He answered on the first ring, which surprised me. "Caleb, I was just thinking about calling you. I've been going through more of Dad's papers and I found some interesting things." "What kind of things?" I asked, curious about what lie he'd prepared. "Well, it turns out Dad had some debts I didn't know about. The business owes more money than I thought. We might have to sell the house just to break even." I almost laughed at how transparent his manipulation was. "That's funny, Julian, because I found some interesting things too." "Oh? What did you find?" "I found the real will, the one Dad updated last October, the one where he splits everything 50-50 between us." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, Julian cleared his throat. "I don't know what you think you found, but I also found the recording where you confessed to stealing money from the business account, and the forged checks, and the credit card applications." Another long silence. When Julian spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the fake concern and manipulation. Now, he sounded desperate. "Caleb, we can work this out between us. Family doesn't need to involve lawyers." "It's too late for that, Julian. The lawyers are already involved. So are the police." Julian's desperation turned to anger instantly. "You have no idea what you're doing, little brother. Dad's business is more complicated than you understand. You'll run it into the ground within 6 months." "Maybe, but at least I'll do it honestly." "Honestly?" Julian laughed bitterly. "You think Dad was honest? He had secrets you can't even imagine. That business has been operating in gray areas for years." I knew Julian was lying, trying to make me doubt Dad's integrity. But his words still stung because I loved and respected our father so much. "The only dishonest person in this family is you, Julian. Dad knew exactly what kind of person you are. That's why he protected me from you." "Protected you?" Julian's voice rose. "Dad babied you your entire life. He never made you face reality." "Well, reality is coming whether you're ready or not." The line went dead. Julian had hung up on me, but I wasn't surprised. He was probably already planning his next move, trying to figure out how to spin the situation to his advantage. I spent that night organizing all my evidence and making backup copies of everything. Whatever Julian tried next, I would be ready. The next morning, I got a call from Margaret Williams, the bookkeeper who had witnessed Dad's will. She sounded upset. "Caleb, I need to tell you something. Julian came to see me yesterday evening. He offered me money to say I never witnessed any will update." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that I clearly remember witnessing your father's signature on October 20th. Julian got very angry and said I was confused about the date." Margaret went on to explain that Julian had tried to convince her that Dad's mental state had been deteriorating, making any recent will invalid. When that didn't work, he'd offered her $5,000 to misremember the details. "I wanted you to know because I'm worried about what Julian might do next. He seemed desperate, almost dangerous." I thanked Margaret for her honesty and immediately called Mr. Mitchell to report Julian's attempted witness tampering. This was another criminal charge to add to the growing list. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Mr. Mitchell said. "Julian is clearly getting more desperate, which makes him more unpredictable." That afternoon, I received court documents by certified mail. Julian was suing me, claiming I had stolen documents from Dad's house and was trying to defraud the estate with a fabricated will. Julian's lawsuit was full of lies, but they were clever lies designed to make me look like the dishonest one. He claimed I had unlimited access to Dad's house and could have easily planted fake documents. He said the will was obviously forged because Dad would never have trusted me with half the business. The most hurtful lie was Julian's claim that I had been manipulating Dad's medications to cause confusion, making him easy to influence. According to Julian's version of events, I was the one who had been stealing from the business and manipulating Dad to cover my tracks. Mr. Mitchell reviewed the lawsuit and shook his head. This is pure projection. Julian is accusing you of everything he actually did. But we have the evidence to prove the truth. We filed our countersuit the same day, including all the evidence from Dad's safety deposit box. We also requested an emergency hearing to resolve the estate dispute as quickly as possible. Julian had made one crucial mistake in his lawsuit. He had admitted under oath that no will existed beyond the 2019 version. But we had documented proof that he'd known about Dad's appointment with Mr. Mitchell to update the will. Julian just perjured himself, Mr. Mitchell explained. This actually helps our case significantly. 2 days later, we received word that the emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent the weekend preparing for court and thinking about Dad. I visited his grave for the first time since the funeral, bringing fresh flowers and sitting on the grass beside his headstone. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Dad," I said out loud, feeling slightly foolish but needing to speak to him somehow. The cemetery was quiet, except for birds singing in the old oak trees. I thought about all the lessons Dad had taught me about integrity and treating people fairly. He would have been heartbroken to see his sons fighting in court, but he also would have wanted justice. On Sunday evening, Julian called me one last time. "Caleb, I want to make you an offer. Take 25% of everything and walk away. No court, no lawyers, no more family drama." "The will says 50-50, Julian. The will is fake, and you know it. But I'm willing to be generous because you're my brother." I thought about Dad's letter, about how he'd known Julian would try exactly this kind of manipulation. "I'll see you in court, Julian. You're making a huge mistake. I have lawyers too, and they're a lot better than yours." But his voice lacked conviction. Julian was scared, and we both knew it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches that reminded me of church pews. Julian sat at the defendant's table with two expensive-looking lawyers in suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. Judge Harrison was an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She reviewed our filings carefully before calling the hearing to order. Mr. Mitchell presented our evidence methodically: the authenticated will, the witness statements, the recording of Julian's confession, and proof of the signature forgery. Julian's lawyers objected frequently, but Judge Harrison overruled them each time. When it was their turn, Julian's lawyers argued that the will was suspicious because it had been conveniently discovered after the estate had already been settled. They suggested I had fabricated everything to steal Julian's inheritance. But they couldn't explain away the bank records, the witness testimony, or the recording. Julian's lead lawyer kept glancing at his client with growing frustration. Finally, Judge Harrison called Julian to testify under oath. I watched my brother walk to the witness stand, and for a moment, he looked like the scared little boy I remembered from our childhood. That sympathy disappeared quickly when Julian began lying under oath about everything. Julian's testimony was a masterclass in manipulation. He painted himself as the responsible older brother who had been forced to handle Dad's affairs while I was too emotional and inexperienced to help. He claimed Dad had often expressed concerns about my financial immaturity and had specifically chosen Julian to inherit the business because he had a proven track record of success. When Mr. Mitchell cross-examined Julian about the forged signature, Julian actually claimed I had forced him to sign my name by threatening to contest the will anyway. My brother was desperate for money. He said if he didn't help me get access to the estate quickly, he would tie everything up in court for years. Judge Harrison's expression grew skeptical as Julian's story became more elaborate and contradictory. When Mr. Mitchell played the recording of Julian confessing to stealing business funds, Julian claimed it was taken out of context and that he'd been joking around.
The final blow came when Mr. Mitchell asked Julian about his attempted bribery of Margaret Williams. He denied it had happened, but Margaret was in the courtroom and asked to testify. Her testimony was simple and devastating. Julian had offered her money to lie under oath, and she had witnesses who had overheard the conversation. Judge Harrison didn't need to deliberate long. After a 30-minute recess, she returned with her decision. This case involves multiple criminal acts by the defendant, including forgery, fraud, and attempted witness tampering. The evidence clearly shows that the 2023 will is authentic and represents the true wishes of the deceased. I order that Dad's estate be distributed according to the real will, with everything split equally between Julian and me. She also ordered Julian to repay the money he had stolen from the business account with interest. But the financial judgment wasn't the most important part. Judge Harrison also referred Julian's case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Mr. Julian Patterson, your actions represent a serious betrayal of family trust and violation of the law. You will face criminal charges for your fraudulent behavior. Julian's face was white as he listened to the judge. His expensive lawyers packed their briefcases quickly, probably already thinking about their next case. As we left the courtroom, Julian caught up to me in the hallway. For a moment, I thought he might apologize or at least acknowledge what he'd done. Instead, he looked at me with pure hatred. "You've destroyed our family for money." "No, Julian, you did that all by yourself." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and legal procedures. The court appointed a neutral administrator to oversee the division of Dad's assets and ensure Julian couldn't interfere with the process. I met with the employees of Dad's landscaping business to explain what had happened and assured them their jobs were secure. Many of them had been worried about Julian's management style and were relieved to learn I would be taking over operations. "Your dad always said you had a good head for business," said Tommy, Dad's longtime foreman. "He taught you to care about the people, not just the profits." The business was in better shape than Julian had claimed, but I found evidence of several loans Julian had taken from the company account. He'd been systematically stealing money for over a year, probably to cover gambling debts or other poor financial decisions. I also discovered that Julian had been charging personal expenses to the business credit card and had even tried to take out a loan against the company's equipment without Dad's knowledge. It was painful to see how thoroughly Julian had betrayed Dad's trust, but it also made me more determined to restore the business to the ethical standards Dad had always maintained. A month after the court hearing, I received a letter from Julian. It wasn't an apology. It was a bill. Julian had itemized every expense he'd paid for Dad's funeral and medical bills, plus a charge for estate management services during the brief time he'd controlled the assets. He wanted me to reimburse him for half of everything, claiming it was only fair since I was inheriting half the estate. I showed the letter to Mr. Mitchell, who laughed out loud. "Julian is still trying to manipulate you," he said. "These expenses were his responsibility as the person who fraudulently claimed control of the estate. You don't owe him anything." I wrote back a simple response. "All funeral and medical expenses will be paid from Dad's estate as originally intended. Your management fees are denied. Please communicate through your attorney regarding any future estate matters." 2 weeks later, I got word that Julian had been indicted on multiple felony charges. The district attorney was taking the case seriously because elder fraud and estate fraud were becoming major problems in our county. I felt no satisfaction in Julian's legal troubles. He was still my brother, and I remembered the good times we'd shared as children. But I also knew that Dad would have wanted justice for what Julian had done. 6 months after Dad's death, I was finally settling into my new life. The landscaping business was thriving under my management, and I'd used some of that secret savings account to modernize our equipment and give all the employees raises. I moved into Dad's house, which felt strange at first, but gradually became comfortable. I kept most of his furniture and decorations, wanting to preserve the memories of family dinners and holiday celebrations. Julian had pled guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years of probation plus restitution requirements. He'd also lost his job at the insurance company where he'd worked, since they couldn't employ someone with fraud convictions. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse confrontation, and I didn't expect we ever would again. Julian had made his choices, and the consequences were his to bear. But I often thought about what Dad would have wanted. He loved both his sons, even though he'd clearly understood Julian's character flaws better than I had. One evening, I found an old photo album in Dad's closet. Page after page showed Julian and me as children, building snowmen, fishing at the lake, working in Dad's garden. In one photo, Julian was helping me tie my shoes. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but he was patiently showing my little brother how to make the loops and pull them tight. I kept the landscaping business, but renamed it Patterson & Son to honor Dad's legacy. The first major project was designing a memorial garden for the local elementary school where I'd started teaching again part-time. Working with my hands in the soil, planting flowers and trees that would grow for decades to come, felt like the best way to honor Dad's memory. He'd always said that landscaping was about creating beauty that outlasts the person who plants it. Mrs. Peterson, our elderly neighbor, often came over to chat while I worked in Dad's garden. She told me stories about Dad that I'd never heard, including how proud he'd been of my teaching career. He used to say that Julian was good with numbers, but you were good with people, she said one afternoon. He thought that made you the better businessman in the long run. I found the sense of peace in maintaining Dad's house and business according to his values. Every day I tried to make decisions based on what Dad would have done, treating employees fairly, serving customers honestly, and contributing positively to the community. The money Julian had stolen was gradually repaid through his probation requirements, and I used it to establish a small scholarship fund at the local community college for students studying business or horticulture. Dad would have liked that. 1 year after Dad's death, I organized a memorial service in the pardon behind his house. I invited his friends, neighbors, business associates, and employees, everyone who knew and loved him. Robert Chan brought his fishing tackle and told stories about Dad's legendary patience and optimism. Margaret Williams shared memories of Dad's meticulous bookkeeping and his insistence on paying every bill promptly. Tommy and the other landscaping crew members planted an oak tree in Dad's honor, choosing a spot where it would eventually shade the entire backyard. Julian didn't come, which was probably for the best. I'd sent him an invitation through his lawyer, but I hadn't really expected him to show up. As the sun set and people began to leave, I sat alone beside Dad's new oak tree and thought about everything that had happened. Julian had tried to steal Dad's legacy, but in the end, he'd only succeeded in destroying himself. I pulled out the pocket watch Dad had left me and checked the time. It was exactly 1 year to the minute since Dad had died. I kept my promise, Dad, I whispered to the evening air. I carried on the family legacy. The oak tree's young leaves rustled in the breeze, and for just a moment, I could almost hear Dad's voice saying, "I knew you would, kiddo. I always knew you would."
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also, check other videos on the channel. We've got more interesting stories for you.